What if I told you that in the age of constant connection, when your phone never stops buzzing, when your calendar is filled with endless meetings, what if the true tragedy of our time is not loneliness, but the inability to ever truly be alone? We live in an era that promises connection at every click, every swipe, every notification. And yet, beneath the endless flow of messages, comments, and likes, an unsettling question haunts us. Why? With more ways to connect than ever, do we often feel more isolated than before? That question is the heartbeat of this video. We are going to explore a paradox that has shaped human life for centuries, but has become urgent in our time. Solitude versus society. The tension between the individual and the crowd. The desire to retreat into silence and the hunger to belong. The fear of being left alone and the exhaustion of never escaping others. At first glance, it seems like we must choose. Either we embrace isolation and risk irrelevance, or we embrace society and risk losing ourselves. But the truth, as we will discover, is far more subtle and far more liberating. Before we dive deeper, let me pause and ask something from you, the person watching. If you are new here, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. It sounds like heaven. What does that reveal about us? Why do some people fear silence while others crave it? Why do some equate solitude with emptiness while others experience it as freedom? This polarity is not new. Thoreau sought solitude at Walden Pond in the 1800s. Nietzsche warned of the herd mentality in the 19th century. The Desert Fathers retreated from bustling cities centuries earlier. Each age has confronted the same dilemma. How much of ourselves belongs to others, and how much must be preserved alone? But here's the twist. Our era is different because society has never been louder. Never before in human history has the crowd followed us into our bedrooms, our pockets, our most intimate moments. Through the phone, the crowd is always present. It comments, it judges, it compares, it demands. You may sit alone, but if your phone is glowing, you're not truly alone. This makes solitude more urgent and more radical than ever before. This is why the conversation we're about to have matters. Because solitude is not just personal, it is political. It is not just a lifestyle choice, it is a form of resistance. To reclaim solitude today is to reclaim attention, freedom, identity. To step into society consciously after solitude is to bring presence, authenticity, and love. Together, solitude and society are not extremes to be chosen between, but tools to be mastered. As you listen, I encourage you not only to follow the ideas, but to reflect on your own life. When was the last time you were truly alone, without distraction, without reaching for a screen? When was the last time you were truly with others, giving undivided attention, without the urge to capture or perform? How do you balance those moments? Or do you, like many of us, feel stuck in a cycle where solitude feels scary and society feels exhausting? The journey we are about to take will not give you easy answers. It will not give you a neat formula of 2 hours of solitude for every 3 hours of society. Instead, it will invite you to rethink how you live, to question the illusions of connection, to embrace the quiet revolution of reclaiming your attention, to discover the inner freedom that solitude unlocks, to learn how to navigate relationships without losing yourself, and ultimately, to craft a life of balance. This is not theory alone. We will walk through stories of entrepreneurs who burned out and rediscovered life by unplugging, of artists who birthed masterpieces in solitude, of everyday people who found freedom in turning off their phones. We will confront the discomfort of being alone and the risks of being with others. We will reflect on wisdom from philosophers and draw lessons from ordinary lives. And by the end, I hope you will not only understand solitude and society differently, but feel compelled to experiment with your own balance. So once again, if you find value in this conversation, subscribe now. Tap the like button. Share this with someone who's drowning in noise. And if you want to go further, consider leaving a super thanks to help sustain this space for thoughtful dialogue. Let's begin this journey not away from the world, not lost in the world, but into the deep center of what it means to live freely in both solitude and society. In the 21st century, the hum of notifications has become the background noise of our lives. You wake up in the morning, and before your feet even touch the floor, you reach for your phone. There it is, a blinking light, a cluster of messages, likes, comments, updates from people you know, and countless others you don't. For a brief second, the rush feels like connection. Someone noticed you. Someone remembered you. Someone thought you mattered enough to tap a button on a screen. But beneath that surface-level exchange lies a strange paradox. The more connected we become, the lonelier we often feel. The constant presence of others in digital form does not guarantee intimacy, and the overwhelming pressure to stay visible, relevant, and always on can be more isolating than silence ever was. The illusion of connection begins with the belief that availability equals intimacy. If you can message anyone instantly, if you can post a thought and have hundreds see it within minutes, then surely you're less alone. But ask anyone who has scrolled through social media late at night, staring at the carefully curated happiness of others, and they will tell you how heavy that loneliness feels. It is the loneliness of comparison, the loneliness of being surrounded by noise, but not truly heard. Social media creates a digital amphitheater where we all perform, but the applause is hollow. A like is not love, a comment is not conversation, and a follower is not a friend. We know this deep down, yet we chase the numbers anyway, hoping that quantity will trick us into believing in quality. This pursuit of digital affirmation is not simply about ego. It is about survival in a world that increasingly equates visibility with value. In the age of influencers, if you are unseen, you may feel irrelevant. For a teenager, this might mean posting a selfie and then anxiously waiting for the trickle of likes, deleting the photo if the count does not rise fast enough. For an adult professional, it might mean maintaining a polished LinkedIn presence, as if one's worth as a worker can be reduced to the neat bullet points of a resume. For a parent, it might mean carefully documenting a child's milestones online, seeking validation for the labor of raising another human being. Across these examples, the pattern is the same. Connection is measured by metrics, and identity becomes entangled with the reactions of others. What makes this illusion so powerful is its partial truth. There is a dopamine rush when a notification appears. Neuroscience has shown that the brain treats likes and comments as micro-rewards, and the unpredictability keeps you hooked. We begin to mistake the cycle of anticipation, reward, and disappointment for genuine connection. We train ourselves to check compulsively, to scroll endlessly, to refresh again and again. And while we're technically connected to thousands, perhaps millions of people, we are rarely engaged in the deep, vulnerable exchanges that actually sustain human life. This is why so many people report feeling lonelier now than in any other time, even though communication technology is more advanced than ever. Consider the dinner table where each person is staring into their own screen, responding to conversations happening elsewhere instead of speaking to one another. Consider the couple lying in bed, back to back, each scrolling through a curated feed of strangers' lives. Consider the young man in a crowded subway, earbuds in, head bent over his phone, never once making eye contact with the living, breathing humans around him. These images are not dystopian fantasies. They are everyday scenes that most of us have participated in. The world is full of people, but without presence, proximity means little. We can sit shoulder to shoulder and still feel like we are galaxies apart. What complicates the matter is that loneliness itself has changed form. In the past, loneliness was often physical. You were alone in a cabin, on a farm, in a house with no one around. Today, loneliness is psychological. It is possible to be in constant digital contact and yet feel unseen. Psychologists call this perceived loneliness, a sense of being disconnected despite interaction. This form of loneliness is crueler because it tricks us into thinking we should not feel lonely. After all, your phone is buzzing. People are reaching out, You are part of a group chat. And yet, if you cannot be authentic in those spaces, if you cannot express pain without fear of judgment, if you cannot share silence without awkwardness, then what you're experiencing is not connection, it is performance. The performative nature of online life also makes solitude harder to access. Solitude, in its pure form, is the state of being content in your own company. It is not loneliness, but presence with oneself. Yet in a culture that prizes visibility, solitude is mistaken for failure. If you're not posting, if you're not updating, if you're not showing the world what you are doing, then you must be irrelevant. Many people fear being forgotten more than they fear being misunderstood. The irony is that in chasing constant validation, we abandon the very practices that would make us feel whole: reflection, silence, self-exploration. To be alone has become synonymous with being undesirable, when in fact it may be the doorway to freedom. This illusion of connection is not new in history. Philosophers and writers have long warned of the dangers of confusing proximity with intimacy. Soren Kierkegaard, writing in the 19th century, spoke of the crowd as the untruth, the tendency of individuals to lose themselves in the masses. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of herd mentality, the pressure to conform to societal norms at the cost of individuality. In the 20th century, Eric Fromm analyzed the ways in which modern humans escape from freedom by immersing themselves in distractions, preferring conformity to the discomfort of solitude. Today, social media has amplified these patterns, making them global and instantaneous. We do not simply risk being swallowed by the crowd. We carry the crowd in our pockets. Real connection, unlike its digital imitation, requires risk. It requires vulnerability, the willingness to be rejected, the courage to reveal parts of yourself that may not be polished or liked. A social media profile can hide all of this behind filters and captions, but face-to-face conversation, especially with someone we trust, offers no such refuge. That is why a single deep conversation with a close friend can feel more nourishing than hours of online engagement. And yet, these conversations are increasingly rare, crowded out by the ease of sending an emoji instead of articulating feelings, of posting a story instead of calling someone to ask how they are really doing. The illusion also thrives because of capitalism's ability to monetize attention. Social platforms are not neutral spaces for human connection. They are engineered systems designed to keep you engaged for as long as possible. The more you scroll, the more ads you see, the more data is collected, and the more profit is generated. Your sense of belonging is not the product, it is the bait. This is why outrage spreads faster than empathy, why controversial content gets promoted over nuanced dialogue, why your feeds feel increasingly polarized. Conflict keeps you engaged, and engagement is currency. In this sense, the illusion of connection is not just a cultural problem. It is a business model. One striking example of this dynamic is the phenomenon of parasocial relationships. Millions of people feel deeply attached to celebrities, influencers, or streamers whom they have never met. They know their habits, their opinions, their routines, and they feel as though they are friends. But the relationship is one-sided. The influencer does not know the follower exists, and the sense of intimacy is an illusion. This does not mean parasocial connections are entirely negative. Sometimes they provide comfort or inspiration, but they cannot substitute for reciprocal human relationships. When a person invests more emotional energy in strangers online than in people physically present in their lives, they risk deepening their sense of isolation. So what does all of this mean for our daily existence? It means that we must learn to see through the illusion. We must recognize that more communication does not equal better connection, that more followers does not mean more friends, that more visibility does not guarantee more meaning. We must remember that the people who matter most are often the ones we neglect while chasing approval from those who barely know us. The challenge of our age is not how to connect, but how to connect deeply, authentically, and meaningfully in a world that constantly offers shallow substitutes. Take, for instance, the experience of attending a concert. In theory, you are surrounded by thousands of people, all united by love of the same music. But if you spend the entire performance recording on your phone, crafting the perfect Instagram story, you may leave without having felt the music at all. The illusion of connection lies in showing others that you were there rather than actually being there. Contrast this with the person who leaves their phone in their pocket, lets the music wash over them, and shares the moment fully with those around them. One walks away with a recording, the other walks away with an experience. Which one is closer to connection? Or consider family gatherings. It is not uncommon for relatives to sit in the same room, each absorbed in a device. There may be words exchanged, but attention is fragmented. The illusion is that presence equals connection. Yet true presence is undivided attention, the willingness to listen, the patience to let silence fill the air without rushing to fill it with chatter. Families often lament the loss of closeness. But closeness is not restored by more text messages or group chats. It is restored by the quality of time shared without distraction. The first step in breaking free from this illusion is awareness. Simply noticing how often we reach for our phones, how reflexively we scroll, how quickly we equate digital interaction with intimacy, can be transformative. Many people, after consciously tracking their usage, are shocked by how much of their day is consumed by seeking micro-connections that leave them empty. Awareness opens the possibility of choice. The choice to put the phone down during dinner, the choice to call a friend instead of liking their post, the choice to spend an evening in silence rather than scrolling through noise. These are small acts of resistance against the illusion. But resistance is not merely about technology. It is about reclaiming the deeper meaning of connection. To connect is to see and be seen, to hear and be heard, to share and to receive. It is not about quantity, but about quality, not about breadth, but about depth. Sometimes that depth is found in a single relationship, sometimes in a handful of trusted companions, sometimes even in a solitary practice that connects you to yourself. The irony is that the more comfortable you are with solitude, the more capable you become of genuine connection. When you no longer need others to fill a void, you can meet them as whole persons rather than as sources of validation. In this light, the illusion of connection is not merely a social issue, but a spiritual one. It asks us to confront the uncomfortable truth that no amount of external validation will compensate for the absence of inner grounding. The likes will fade, the followers will drift away. The platforms themselves may one day vanish. What remains is the relationship you have with yourself. If that relationship is shallow, no number of digital connections will make it deeper. If that relationship is strong, you can engage with others from a place of authenticity, free from the desperate hunger for affirmation. And so the task of our time is to move beyond illusion into reality, to put aside the theater of constant performance and rediscover the sacredness of silence, the beauty of being unseen, the joy of intimacy that cannot be quantified. This is not a call to abandon technology, but to use it consciously, refusing to let it define our worth. It is an invitation to remember that connection is not something that happens on a screen, it is something that happens in the heart. And if we can learn this lesson, then perhaps we will no longer feel alone in a crowd, but alive in our own company, ready to meet others not out of need, but out of love, in a world that rarely sleeps, where the glow of screens follows us into the late hours of night and the first moments of dawn. Something unexpected has begun to stir beneath the surface. People are quietly unplugging, stepping back, and retreating from the endless noise. It is not a rebellion with banners or slogans, not a movement that shouts on the streets, but rather a whisper carried from one weary soul to another. This is the quiet revolution, the slow, deliberate act of reclaiming our lives from the grip of constant connectivity. It is not about rejecting society, nor about condemning technology, but about rediscovering what it means to simply be without the ceaseless demand to perform, respond, and consume. The rise of digital detoxes is one of the clearest signs of this shift. The very phrase would have seemed strange a few decades ago. Detoxes were for substances, not screens. But today, the metaphor is accurate. The digital world has become a drug, delivering constant hits of novelty and stimulation, and stepping away feels like withdrawal. More and more people are recognizing the addiction. Wellness retreats advertise weekends without Wi-Fi as if it were a luxury. Influencers post about logging off with as much drama as announcing a new product. Parents confiscate tablets from children not out of cruelty, but in desperation to protect attention spans that shrink by the year. We laugh at the absurdity of paying money to go somewhere without internet, but the very existence of such retreats reveals how deep the problem runs. Consider the story of a man named Kevin, a successful entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. For years, he prided himself on being hyperconnected, the kind of person who answered emails at 2 in the morning, who never missed a notification, who juggled multiple devices at once. His life was efficient, but also restless. One day, after missing his daughter's school recital because he was glued to his phone on a critical call, he realized he had confused urgency with importance. So he began experimenting with weekends offline. At first, it was unbearable. He fidgeted, reached for his phone, felt the phantom buzz of notifications that weren't there. But slowly, something shifted. He noticed the sound of birds in his backyard, the laughter of his children, the way conversations felt fuller when no one was half distracted. The detox was not just about technology. It was about recovering parts of himself he had forgotten. Stories like Kevin's are not isolated. Across the world, people are rediscovering the art of doing nothing, of sitting with themselves without distraction, of walking without headphones, of reading a book without checking a feed every 5 minutes. This is not nostalgia for a simpler time. It is a recognition that the pace of modern life is unsustainable when every moment is colonized by a screen. And while the detox trend sometimes risks becoming another performance, posting about unplugging to gain likes, it nonetheless reveals a genuine hunger for silence. Philosophically, this movement echoes ancient wisdom. The Stoics spoke of withdrawing into oneself as a form of inner freedom. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor surrounded by duties, wrote in his private journal that a man carries within him a quiet place, a retreat of the soul, where no noise can intrude. The desert fathers of early Christianity retreated into barren landscapes, not out of misanthropy, but to strip away distraction and face themselves honestly. Thoreau went to Walden Pond, not to escape society forever, but to test whether life could be lived deliberately, with clarity rather than clutter. Each of these figures understood that solitude is not the absence of connection, but the presence of self. And yet, in today's culture, solitude is often confused with loneliness. The difference is subtle but crucial. Loneliness is the pain of being without others when you long for company. Solitude is the joy of being with yourself when you are at peace. A teenager scrolling through TikTok at midnight, desperate for interaction, is lonely. A writer sitting in a cabin, filling page after page, is in solitude. One condition depletes, the other enriches. One shrinks the soul, the other expands it. But because society equates busyness with worth, solitude is often stigmatized. The person who eats lunch alone is pitted, as though they lack friends, when they may be savoring a rare chance to think. The one who chooses to travel solo is questioned, as though independence must hide sadness, when in fact they may be more open to encounters than those traveling in a crowd. Part of the quiet revolution is reclaiming solitude as honorable. We see this in the growing literature about mindfulness, meditation, and intentional living. People are turning to practices that slow the mind, from yoga to journaling to silent retreats. These practices are not just wellness trends. They're forms of resistance against a culture that insists we must always be plugged in. To sit still in silence for 10 minutes is now an act of rebellion, as radical in its own way as a protest. To choose not to answer a text immediately, to let an email wait until morning, to walk without headphones. These are small revolutions in a world that demands constant response. But why is solitude so frightening to many? Because when the noise stops, the self is revealed. In silence, you cannot hide behind distraction. You confront your own thoughts, fears, and desires. This confrontation can be unsettling, which is why so many prefer the comfort of endless scrolling. It is easier to drown in the lives of others than to face your own. Yet without that confrontation, growth stalls. Solitude is the mirror in which you see your true reflection, unfiltered and unedited. Only by looking into that mirror can you discover what actually matters to you, rather than what society insists should matter. There is a famous experiment in psychology where participants were asked to sit in a room with nothing to do for 15 minutes. The only option available was to press a button that would deliver an electric shock. Astonishingly, many chose to shock themselves rather than sit alone with their thoughts. This reveals how deeply uncomfortable solitude has become. And yet, if we cannot sit with ourselves, how can we expect to be truly present with others? If we cannot endure our own company, we risk using relationships as a way to avoid ourselves, rather than as a way to meet others authentically. The quiet revolution challenges this pattern by reframing solitude not as punishment, but as privilege. Think of the artist who spends long hours in the studio, not because they reject society, but because creation requires silence. Think of the scientist lost in thought during a solitary walk, stumbling upon the insight that changes an entire field. Think of the musician practicing alone for hours so that later, on stage, the music flows effortlessly into the hearts of others. Solitude is not sterile, it is fertile. It births art ideas and clarity that cannot be found in the noise of constant interaction. Yet this revolution does not demand abandoning society altogether. It simply asks for balance. The individual who retreats for a time returns stronger, more grounded, more capable of giving. When you know yourself through solitude, you bring a deeper presence into every social interaction. You are less needy, less dependent on validation, more generous because you are not grasping for attention. A friend who can enjoy solitude is often the friend who listens best, because they're not desperate to fill silence with words. A partner who can sit in stillness is often the partner who can love without clinging. Solitude strengthens society by strengthening individuals within it. Examples of this principle abound in contemporary life. Consider the movement of remote workers who leave crowded cities in search of quieter towns or rural areas. Many thought the pandemic-driven exodus was temporary, but for some, it became permanent. These individuals discovered that being slightly removed from the chaos allowed them to work better, think clearer, and reconnect with simple joys like gardening, walking, or cooking. They did not abandon society. They reshaped their relationship with it, choosing quality over quantity of connection. Or think about the growing interest in minimalist living. The minimalist does not reject possessions entirely, but recognizes that clutter, physical, digital, emotional, distracts from what matters. In decluttering, there's an implicit pursuit of solitude, a clearing of space for reflection. A minimalist room is not empty, it is full of possibility. Likewise, a minimalist schedule, one that leaves gaps of unstructured time, is not wasted. It is where creativity sneaks in. These trends reveal that people are yearning for something quieter, slower, deeper than what mainstream culture offers. The quiet revolution also manifests in micro decisions. Choosing to put a phone on airplane mode during dinner, choosing to read a paperback instead of scrolling, choosing to take a walk without announcing it online. These small acts accumulate into a life with more presence. They remind us that solitude is not about retreating forever, but about creating pockets of stillness that sustain us. And perhaps most importantly, this revolution forces us to ask, who are we when no one is watching? Social media encourages us to live for the gaze of others, but solitude strips away the audience. In solitude, there is no applause, no performance. No external validation. You're left with yourself. That can be terrifying, but it is also liberating. For only when you stop playing to the crowd can you begin to hear the quiet voice within. The one that tells you what you truly desire, what you truly fear, what you truly value. And when you return to society, guided by that inner voice, your contributions are more authentic and your relationships more genuine. The quiet revolution is not loud, and perhaps that is its strength. It does not seek headlines. It does not demand mass participation. It does not measure success in numbers. It begins in the smallest of ways with a choice to pause, to breathe, to listen. But multiplied across millions of individuals, it carries the potential to reshape how society functions. A culture that honors solitude will inevitably honor depth over shallowness, presence over performance, authenticity over appearance. And so, in the midst of a hyperconnected age, the revolution we need may not be louder voices or faster streams of information. It may be the courage to disconnect, to step back, and to rediscover the silence that has always been waiting. This is not loneliness. This is not isolation. This is the quiet revolution, the freedom of simply being. To be alone is often misunderstood as to be deprived. But those who have walked deeply into solitude know that being alone can be the most abundant state a person can experience. When the noise of the world recedes, when the performance of identity is paused, when a need to respond to every external demand is suspended, something unexpected begins to emerge. It is not emptiness, but fullness. Not despair, but clarity. In solitude, a new dimension of freedom appears, a kind of freedom that cannot be given by society and cannot be taken away by it. This inner freedom, once glimpsed, is addictive in the best sense. It calls you back again and again, reminding you that the richest parts of life are not found in applause, but in stillness. One of the most striking benefits of solitude is creativity. Throughout history, some of the greatest works of art, literature, and philosophy were born not in crowds, but in silence. Virginia Woolf wrote about the necessity of a room of one's own for any woman who wished to write. Beethoven composed his symphonies in long hours of solitude, sometimes walking the countryside with notebooks in hand, scribbling melodies that no one else could hear yet. Steve Jobs, though surrounded by the bustle of Silicon Valley, insisted on periods of isolation to refine his vision, famously taking long solitary walks to think. These examples are not accidents. They illustrate a truth about human nature. Creativity flourishes when distractions vanish. The mind, unburdened by the chatter of others, begins to make connections, to imagine, to play. What society calls boredom, solitude transforms into innovation. Yet creativity is only one facet of inner freedom. Another is self-discovery. To live constantly in the gaze of others is to live according to their expectations. You dress, speak, behave, even think in ways that anticipate the approval or disapproval of an audience. But when you are alone, the audience disappears. You're left with yourself, raw and unfiltered. At first, this can be unsettling. Many people avoid solitude because it forces them to confront truths they would rather ignore. The job that feels meaningless, the relationship that is hollow, the dreams they have buried. But to confront these truths is the beginning of freedom. For only by acknowledging what is false can you begin to pursue what is real. Imagine a person who spends every evening attending social events, laughing at jokes they do not find funny, nodding at opinions they do not share, drinking to numb a sense of emptiness. To the outside world, they seem vibrant, well-connected, successful. Yet in moments of rare silence, a voice inside whispers, "This is not who I am." That voice is easily drowned by the next party, the next conversation, the next distraction. But in solitude, it grows louder. And if one dares to listen, it becomes a guide. This is how people reinvent themselves, not in the noise of conformity, but in the quiet of reflection. Clarity is another gift of solitude. The modern world thrives on confusion. News cycles bombard us with conflicting narratives. Advertisements tell us we are incomplete without products. Social media floods us with comparisons that distort reality. To live constantly immersed in this environment is to live disoriented, unable to tell what matters from what is trivial. Solitude acts like a clearing in the forest. When you step away, the fog lifts. Decisions that felt overwhelming begin to simplify. You see, perhaps for the first time in years, what is essential and what is noise. A person might realize that the promotion they have been chasing is not worth the cost of their health, or that the approval of acquaintances means little compared to the love of a few close friends, or that the constant pursuit of novelty has left them hollow when what they really crave is depth. These realizations rarely come in the frenzy of daily life. They arrive in stillness. Freedom, at its core, is not the absence of constraints, but the ability to live according to what truly matters to you. And solitude is the training ground for this freedom. In solitude, you practice being enough without validation, being content without performance, being whole without applause. You learn to sit with your own thoughts, to trust your own voice, to value your own company. And when you return to society, you are less easily swayed by the tides of opinion, less dependent on approval, less vulnerable to manipulation. This is not arrogance. It is groundedness. A person who has tasted solitude knows that their worth does not fluctuate with the market of attention. Examples of this can be seen in people who have deliberately stepped away from society for a time. Consider the monks who enter silent retreats for months or even years. To outsiders, such practices may seem extreme, even inhuman, but those who return often speak of an indescribable freedom. They no longer fear being alone because they have discovered the richness within. Or consider artists who withdraw to cabins or rural studios, cutting themselves off from the rush of the city. When they emerge, their work often carries a depth and originality that could not have been born in constant noise. These are not just eccentric choices. They are demonstrations of a principle. To know yourself, you must spend time with yourself. And yet, unlocking inner freedom does not require dramatic withdrawal. It can happen in small, intentional acts of solitude. A morning walk without your phone, an evening journal session, a weekend spent offline. What matters is not the length of time, but the depth of presence. Even 15 minutes of true solitude can shift perspective, reminding you that you are not merely a cog in the machine of society, but a unique being with desires and values of your own. The freedom that comes from solitude is also freedom from comparison. One of the greatest thieves of joy in modern life is the endless comparison facilitated by social media. You measure your vacation against someone else's, your body against filtered images, your success against curated careers. This comparison breeds envy, inadequacy, despair. But in solitude, the measuring stick dissolves. There is no one to compare to, no stage to perform on, no competition to win. You are simply yourself. And in that simplicity, you may rediscover joy in things that comparison had stolen. The taste of a meal, the pleasure of a hobby, the beauty of sunset. Without comparison, life becomes richer, not poorer. Perhaps one of the most liberating aspects of solitude is the way it reveals that external validation is not necessary for fulfillment. Society trains us to crave recognition, to chase status, to define success by how others see us. But solitude shows that true success is internal alignment. If your actions match your values, if your days reflect what matters to you, if your inner voice is at peace, then you're successful regardless of what the world says. This is why so many spiritual traditions emphasize solitude. It is not about escaping others, but about escaping the prison of needing others to tell you who you are. There's also a paradox at the heart of solitude. They do not demand that others complete them. They invite others to share with them. This makes them better friends, partners, parents, colleagues. Far from making one antisocial, solitude deepens social capacity. It allows love to flow freely, without the distortions of dependency. Modern life offers many stories that illustrate this principle. Consider the growing popularity of solo travel. At first glance, it may seem counterintuitive. Why would someone choose to explore a foreign country without companions? Yet countless travelers report that solo journeys are among the most transformative experiences of their lives. Alone, they're forced to confront themselves, to navigate fear, to make decisions without leaning on others. And in the process, they discover strengths and desires they did not know they had. Ironically, solo travelers often end up meeting more people, forming deeper connections because they are open in ways groups are not. Solitude becomes not isolation, but expansion. Another example can be found in the rise of meditation apps and practices. Millions of people now set aside time each day to sit in silence, focusing on breath, letting thoughts come and go. These practices are ancient, but their resurgence in a hyperconnected world shows that people intuitively know they need solitude. Even 10 minutes of meditation can create a sense of spaciousness that changes the entire day. It is not just stress relief. It is freedom, the freedom to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be swept away. The freedom unlocked in solitude also has a societal dimension. A person who knows themselves is less likely to be manipulated by propaganda, less likely to be swayed by trends, less likely to sacrifice integrity for approval. Solitude breeds independence of thought. It allows one to step back from the echo chambers of groupthink and see with clearer eyes. Many of history's reformers and visionaries were people who, in some form, embraced solitude. They listened to their own conscience rather than the crowd. From Martin Luther King Jr. writing in a jail cell to Gandhi spinning his wheel in silence, solitude has often been the seedbed of social change. This raises a provocative point. Solitude is not selfish. On the contrary, it may be one of the greatest gifts you can offer others. By becoming grounded in solitude, you bring into society a person who is less anxious, less reactive, less needy. You become a source of stability in a turbulent world. The freedom you unlock within radiates outward, offering others permission to slow down, to reflect, to breathe. In this way, solitude is not withdrawal but contribution. To truly unlock inner freedom, however, one must approach solitude with intentionality. Simply being alone does not guarantee growth. It can just as easily become loneliness or distraction. Sitting alone while scrolling endlessly is not solitude. It is isolation disguised as connection. True solitude requires presence. It requires turning off the noise and turning toward yourself. It may involve discomfort, but that discomfort is the doorway to transformation. Like exercise, it strengthens through effort. And once you have tasted the richness of solitude, the world never looks quite the same. You realize that freedom is not about doing whatever you want whenever you want. It is about alignment between inner truth and outer action. It is about living from a place of authenticity rather than performance. It is about carrying within you a quiet center that no storm can shake. This is the freedom that solitude unlocks, a freedom more valuable than wealth, more stable than fame, more enduring than power. In the end, the paradox of solitude is that it is both intensely personal and profoundly universal. Each person must walk into it alone, yet what they discover there, the need for authenticity, the hunger for meaning, the joy of clarity, is something that unites us all. Solitude is the workshop of the soul, the birthplace of creativity, the sanctuary of freedom. And in a world that constantly pulls us outward, to remember that we carry such a sanctuary within may be the most revolutionary act of all. Once a person has tasted the depth of solitude and discovered the freedom that comes from knowing themselves, the question inevitably arises: how does one return to the world of others? It is one thing to sit quietly, far from distraction, to feel whole in the silence of one's own company. But human beings are not meant to live entirely apart. We are social creatures, wired for connection, drawn to community. The challenge, then, is not whether to live alone or with others, but how to engage with society without losing the peace cultivated in solitude. This is the delicate art of navigating the social realm. The first truth about social life is that not all connections are equal. Our culture often measures popularity by numbers. How many friends you have on Facebook, how many followers on Instagram, how many contacts in your phone. But numbers are deceptive. 10 genuine relationships can nourish you more than 10,000 superficial ones. A dinner with one trusted friend can leave you feeling more alive than a party with 100 acquaintances. To navigate the social realm wisely, you must learn to distinguish between relationships that feed your soul and those that drain it. Consider the difference between a conversation where you feel seen and one where you feel invisible. In the first, time seems to stretch. You lose track of minutes as stories flow naturally, as silence feels comfortable, as both parties bring their full presence. In the second, you find yourself glancing at the clock, nodding politely, waiting for it to end. Life is too short to fill with the latter. To choose your interactions wisely is not selfish, it is survival. Every moment you spend in shallow connection is a moment not spent in depth. A moment stolen from the relationships that truly matter. This is where boundaries become essential. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls, as acts of rejection. In truth, boundaries are acts of respect for yourself and respect for others. When you say no to an invitation, it is not always because you dislike the person. It may be because you know that saying yes would leave you exhausted, resentful, or distracted from what is important. A life without boundaries is a life of constant compromise, where your attention is pulled in 100 directions and your energy scattered. A life with boundaries is one where your yes has weight, where your presence is given deliberately, where your relationships are chosen rather than endured. The difficulty is that society often resists boundaries. We live in a culture that equates availability with kindness, responsiveness with responsibility. To not answer a message immediately is seen as rude. To decline an invitation is judged as cold. But constant availability is not kindness, it is erasure. When you're always available to others, you disappear to yourself. Navigating the social realm means daring to disappoint in small ways so that you can show up fully in the moments that matter most. True friends will understand this. Those who demand endless access without respect for your boundaries reveal themselves not as friends, but as consumers of your energy. One way to understand this is through the metaphor of a garden. Relationships are like plants. Some are flowers that bloom brightly but briefly, offering beauty but requiring little maintenance. Others are trees that grow slowly, steadily, offering shade and fruit for years if tended with care. Still others are weeds, draining nutrients, crowding the soil, choking out growth. To navigate wisely, you must learn which plants to water, which to prune, which to remove altogether. This is not cruelty, it is cultivation. A gardener does not hate the weed. They simply recognize that space is finite, and what grows in one place prevents growth in another. So too with relationships. Of course, not all social interactions can be chosen. Work, family, community obligations all bring people into our lives we might not have sought. But even here, the lessons of solitude apply. When you carry a strong sense of self, you are less likely to be destabilized by difficult interactions. The colleague who gossips, the relative who criticizes, the stranger who provokes, all can unsettle you if you are uncertain of who you are. But if solitude has taught you to ground yourself, you can engage without losing balance. You can listen without absorbing toxicity, respond without reacting, remain present without surrendering your peace. This strength is not indifference, it is clarity. To engage wisely is not to withdraw from society, but to enter it from a position of freedom. You are free to give because you are not giving from emptiness. You are free to love because you are not loving out of desperation. You are free to disagree because you no longer need universal approval. This is what makes contributions from solitude so powerful. When a person who knows themselves speaks, their words carry weight, not because they are louder, but because they are rooted. When they act, their actions inspire, not because they are showy, but because they are authentic. Examples of this can be seen in figures across history and daily life. Think of someone like Nelson Mandela, who spent years in solitary confinement and emerged not with bitterness, but with clarity of purpose. His solitude did not make him withdraw from society. It prepared him to lead it with wisdom. And presence is perhaps the greatest gift one can give another. In a conversation where you feel truly heard, you walk away lighter, affirmed, more human. To navigate society wisely is to offer this gift more often and to recognize when it is not being offered in return. Another aspect of wise navigation is recognizing the seasons of relationships. The danger, of course, is swinging too far toward isolation, using solitude as a shield against vulnerability. Navigating the social realm requires courage. For connection always involves risk, the risk of rejection, misunderstanding, loss. But solitude equips you for this risk. When you know that you are whole in yourself, rejection does not shatter you. You can step into relationships not with fear, but with openness. You can take the risk of being known because you are not defined by another's response. This is why solitude and society are not opposites, but complements. Solitude gives you the grounding to risk connection, and connection gives you the joy of sharing what solitude has taught you. In practical terms, navigating the social realm wisely might look like this: saying yes to fewer invitations, but showing up fully when you do, keeping your circle small but deep. Engaging online with discernment rather than compulsion, allowing silence in conversation rather than rushing to fill it, declining interactions that drain you without guilt. But it creates a life where social interactions are not a blur of noise, but a series of meaningful exchanges. Perhaps the deepest lesson of navigating the social realm is that society does not need more noise. It needs more presence. It does not need more followers. It needs more friends. It does not need more performance. It needs more authenticity. When you cultivate solitude, you bring these qualities back into the social fabric. You model a different way of being slower, deeper, freer. And in doing so, you quietly give others permission to do the same. At the end of the day, we cannot escape society, nor should we. We need others, not as props in our performance, but as companions in our journey. But we also cannot lose ourselves in the crowd. The task is to walk the narrow path between solitude and society, to carry the peace of one into the demands of the other, to be both grounded in yourself and open to others. This is the art of navigating the social realm, and it is an art worth mastering, for it is here that freedom and connection finally meet. Human beings have always struggled with extremes. We swing like a pendulum, seeking salvation in one direction, then disillusioned, rushing toward its opposite. In matters of solitude and society, this tendency is especially strong. Some decide that the only way to preserve their peace is to retreat completely, to live far from others, to shut out the noise of the world. Others conclude that the only way to feel alive is to immerse themselves entirely in the crowd, to always be surrounded, always be engaged, always be needed. Yet both paths, taken alone, lead to distortion. A life of endless solitude risks turning into isolation, a retreat not into freedom but into fear. A life of endless society risks dissolving the self into the expectations of others, leaving no room for reflection or authenticity. The balanced life lies not in choosing one extreme over the other, but in weaving the two together into a rhythm that serves growth, meaning, and joy. Balance does not mean perfect symmetry, as though one could measure hours of solitude and hours of society on a scale and keep them even. It means harmony, just as music relies on both sound and silence. A fulfilling life relies on both togetherness and aloneness. The proportions shift depending on season, circumstance, and temperament. A writer in the midst of a novel may require long stretches of solitude, broken only by occasional grounding conversations. A parent of young children may crave solitude in brief, precious intervals, relying more heavily on the companionship of family. A community leader may spend most of their time in public, but guard fiercely the private hours where they restore themselves. Balance is not static. It is dynamic, a dance between solitude and society, where each supports the other. One of the greatest myths of modern culture is that you must choose. The myth whispers, if you prefer solitude, you are antisocial, perhaps broken, destined to loneliness. If you prefer society, you are shallow, incapable of depth, afraid of yourself. Both stereotypes are false. The truth is that solitude and society are not enemies, but partners. Solitude provides the grounding that makes social life meaningful. Society provides the warmth that makes solitude fruitful. When you honor both, you discover that they feed each other. Time alone deepens your presence with others. Time with others enriches your return to yourself. Think of it as breathing. Consider the example of artists who alternate between isolation and collaboration. A musician may spend months in solitude, writing songs, wrestling with melodies alone in a studio. But eventually, a parent might carve out an hour of silence before bed, reading or journaling, which replenishes the patience needed to engage lovingly with children during the day. A friend might spend an afternoon alone to recharge, ensuring that the evening spent together is full of presence rather than half-hearted distraction. Balance transforms ordinary life because it ensures that social interactions are chosen from abundance, not obligation, and that solitude is entered with purpose, not avoidance. Philosophers and spiritual teachers across traditions have long emphasized this balance. Aristotle spoke of humans as social animals, but he also valued contemplation, seeing the examined life as the highest form of existence. Buddhism emphasizes Sangha, the community of practitioners, but also solitude in meditation, where insight is born. Christian monastics withdrew into silence, but returned to teach and serve. Indigenous traditions often integrate solitary vision quests with communal rituals. The message across cultures is clear. Solitude without society risks sterility. Society without solitude risks superficiality. Together, they create a life that is both grounded and expansive. In our era, balance has become more difficult precisely because extremes are so seductive. The cult of productivity urges us to always be available, to attend every meeting, to answer every message, to fill every slot on the calendar. The cult of escapism urges others to retreat fully, to delete all accounts, to cut ties, to live as though one can exist untouched by society. Both temptations are understandable, especially when the world feels overwhelming. But neither leads to freedom. True freedom is found in discerning when to step back and when to step forward, when to be silent and when to speak, when to preserve energy and when to spend it generously. Practical wisdom for achieving balance often comes from small choices. Turn off notifications during dinner and give your family undivided attention. Spend one day a week offline, not as a punishment, but as a gift. Call a close friend instead of attending a large gathering that drains you. Protect your morning routine as sacred solitude before entering the demands of the day. Say yes to projects that align with your values, and say no to those that only clutter your time. Balance is not found in dramatic gestures, but in steady habits that honor both sides of human nature. It is also important to recognize that balance changes over time. In youth, many crave society, eager to meet, to belong, to explore. In middle age, solitude becomes more precious, a chance to reflect, to reorient, to recover from endless responsibilities. In old age, some return again to society, seeking the warmth of community, while others embrace solitude with a serenity that comes from a life well lived. There is no single formula. Balance is not a fixed rule, but a lifelong negotiation. an art that must be practiced again and again. One of the hidden benefits of balance is resilience. When society disappoints you, when friends betray, when communities fracture, when recognition fades, solitude sustains you. And when solitude becomes heavy, when silence feels oppressive, when self-reflection turns harsh, society restores you. Each mode protects you from the dangers of the other. This is why the balanced life is not fragile. It does not collapse when one element fails. It bends, it shifts, it endures. Examples from everyday life illustrate this beautifully. Take the story of a nurse who spends long, exhausting hours caring for patients. She loves her work, but knows it depletes her. So each weekend, she takes solitary hikes, letting nature heal her spirit. Without solitude, she would burn out. Without society, her compassion would have no outlet. Or consider a software engineer who spends most of the day coding in silence, absorbed in abstract problems. In the evenings, he joins friends for dinner, sharing laughter and stories that remind him he is more than his work. Without society, he would sink into obsession. Without solitude, his mind would never focus deeply enough to create. These are ordinary lives, yet they embody the extraordinary wisdom of balance. The balanced life also requires honesty. Sometimes we claim to seek society when what we really fear is solitude. Sometimes we claim to seek solitude when what we really fear is intimacy. To know what you need requires listening inward. Are you avoiding others out of genuine need for space? Or out of fear of vulnerability? Are you filling your calendar with events because you value connection or because you fear being left alone with your thoughts? Balance asks for honesty about motives, for the courage to face discomfort on both sides. Solitude can be uncomfortable because it reveals yourself. Society can be uncomfortable because it reveals your dependence. But leaning into these discomforts is where growth happens. Perhaps the most profound aspect of the balanced life is how it transforms relationships. When you enter society from solitude, you bring presence rather than hunger. You no longer use others to escape yourself. You meet them as whole beings. This deepens intimacy because true intimacy is not two incomplete people clinging together, but two whole people choosing to share. Likewise, when you return to solitude after society, you carry with you the warmth of connection. You reflect on conversations, savor memories, integrate lessons. Each realm enriches the other. Balance makes life a dialogue, not a monologue, a dance rather than a march. In a world that glorifies extremes, balance may seem unremarkable. It does not produce the spectacle of total withdrawal or the drama of constant availability. But quietly, steadily, balance produces something far more valuable, a life that feels whole. A life where you are neither lost in others nor lost in yourself. A life where solitude and society are not enemies to be chosen between, but allies to be cultivated together. This is not an easy life, but it is a life that endures, that grows, that gives. And in the end, perhaps balance is less about strategy than about trust, the trust that you can step into solitude without losing society, and step into society without losing yourself. To trust that silence and speech, retreat and return, aloneness and togetherness are all parts of the same human rhythm. To live with this trust is to live with freedom. Not the freedom of extremes, but the freedom of wholeness. That is the balanced life. By the time we arrive at the end of this journey, having walked through the illusions of connection, the quiet revolution of solitude, the unlocking of inner freedom, and the delicate navigation of the social realm, a simple truth emerges. For we live in a world that insists we must pick sides, that whispers constantly we must either belong entirely to others or retreat entirely into ourselves. But to live fully is to resist that false choice. It is to understand that solitude and society are not enemies, nor even opposites, but complementary forces shaping the human spirit. The lesson of solitude is that you are enough. The lesson of society is that you're not alone. Between these two, a balanced life is forged. It is not enough to retreat into silence. One must also carry silence back into the noise. It is not enough to be present in community. One must also protect the inner sanctuary that community cannot touch. What, then, are the lessons worth carrying forward? One is that solitude is fertile. Time alone is not wasted time. Understands that what he discovers alone is meant to be shared. A student who studies in silence all week and then spends Friday nights with friends dancing and laughing understands that joy is found both in reflection and in release. None of these lives are perfect. All of them, however, embody balance, weaving solitude and society into a pattern that sustains them. We can also learn from those who failed to balance. The celebrity constantly surrounded by admirers, yet broken by inner emptiness, shows what happens when society replaces solitude entirely. For only when you know yourself can you meet another authentically. Buddhism speaks of non-attachment, a quality cultivated in meditation, but also of compassion, which blossoms only in relation to others. Across traditions, the wisdom converges. Solitude and society are not rivals, but allies. The balanced life is not glamorous. It will not win awards or trend online. It does not look like constant productivity, nor like dramatic withdrawal. It looks like ordinary choices made deliberately. It looks like turning off your phone to listen to a child tell a story. It looks like stepping outside alone at night to breathe in the silence of stars. It looks like saying no to a shallow interaction so you can say yes to a meaningful one. It looks like protecting the inner life without hoarding it, and giving to others without losing yourself. The lessons of solitude and society spread not by shouting, but by example. The revolution is quiet, but it is real. The final lesson, then, is not merely personal but collective. For if enough individuals learn to balance solitude and society, the very fabric of culture shifts. Workplaces would value depth as much as availability. Communities would honor silence as much as noise. Technology would be used consciously rather than compulsively. Families would prioritize presence over distraction. Friendships would deepen. Balance teaches you how to live with both truths without fear. That is the lesson. That is the gift. That is the freedom waiting for anyone willing to pause, to listen, to breathe. We have traveled a long way together. From the illusions of connection that trap us in endless scrolling, to the quiet revolution of reclaiming silence, to the inner freedom unlocked by solitude. To embrace both is to discover a wholeness that no algorithm, no performance, no illusion can provide. As you leave this video, I want you to pause and ask yourself, what small act can you take today to honor solitude? Maybe it's leaving your phone behind on a walk. Maybe it's sitting in silence for 10 minutes without distraction. Maybe it's writing in a journal. Thank you for reflecting, and thank you for being part of this journey. Like, share, subscribe, and leave a super thanks if you can. Until next time, may you find peace in solitude, joy in society, and freedom in the balance between them.